Well, thank you all. It's a pleasure being here. And before we talk about the science that contradicts what Ocasio-Cortez and others say, I think it's important to examine why this has become a political issue. The question often is posed to me, why does a limited government, free market public policy organization address global warming? This should be a topic of science. It shouldn't be a matter of politics. And I agree, it should be. The problem is the asserted solutions, the proposed solutions to this global warming issue, higher taxes, more government restrictions, new government agencies, wars on fossil fuels and the coal industry in particular, these are things that the left has been pushing for decades. It didn't take a global warming issue to bring these so-called solutions to the forefront. So if you are a liberal, if you are a member of the Democratic Party that's in the Ocasio-Cortez wing, you don't have any incentive to look under the hood of the science claims. I mean, it doesn't really matter to you if we're facing a climate crisis or not. These are solutions, so-called solutions, that you're pushing. However, if you cherish individual liberty, if you cherish free markets, if you cherish affordable energy, when the same solutions are being proposed for climate change, well, now for global warming, that were proposed for global cooling 30 years ago, and that were proposed for everything else in between, you want to look under the hood and make sure the science justifies it. And when you look at the science, it's clear that the science does not justify the notion that we're facing a climate crisis. And that's why we're involved, because the solutions are pushing a leftist agenda that is not supported by sound science. So first of all, it's important to understand just how crazy the environmental left is on this issue. Here is a quote from Ocasio-Cortez, February 25th. "Our planet is going to be a disaster if we don't turn this ship around." And so it's basically like there's scientific consensus that the lives of children are going to be very difficult. And does it lead, I think, young people to have a legitimate question, is it okay to have children? The planet is in such a catastrophic state that having children is cruel. It's a cruel sentence to those who you want to have. Let's look at the science and make sure that this justifies what she wants to do. First of all, it's important to understand the context of today's temperatures. We're often told that these are the hottest temperatures in history. 12 of the past 13 years were the hottest ones on record. Well, that's not the case. These are taken by the European Science Foundation. These are not in dispute. These are temperature data taken from ice cores drilled in Greenland, and they've been confirmed by ice cores drilled in Antarctica. Scientists are able to look at oxygen isotopes in the ice and determine temperature from this. Now, if you look at the chart I want you to look at first is on the top right. Well, actually, let's start with the top left. As I get my pointer, here we go. Okay, this is the past 120,000 years, past 100,000 years. We see an ice age glaciation until about 20,000 years ago. Temperatures warmed, and in the past 10,000 years, this is our modern warm period. By the way, this cycle goes back over 3 million years. You have approximately 100 to 150,000 years of cooling temperatures and very short, on average about 10,000 years apiece, warm periods. Now on the top right, you see the past 10,000 years expanded. And what you notice here, temperatures on the far right, this is the warming of the 20th century. Even with this warming, the context of our current temperatures is quite cool compared to the temperatures that have dominated human civilization. It's only in the past 100 years that we can say temperatures, if we look at the temperatures of the Little Ice Age, though only in comparison to those temperatures can we say temperatures are warm. And in the bottom, we have temperatures over the past 2,000 years. We see the medieval warm period 1,000 years ago. Temperatures were warmer than today. That's when the Vikings had settlements in Greenland that were buried under snow and ice, still are. That's when they were growing grapes in vineyards in England. Temperatures today, again, we see the warming merely warm compared to the Little Ice Age. But for most of human civilization, with technologies far less advanced than today, temperatures were much warmer and we did not have a climate catastrophe. Now, these temperatures were confirmed even by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is from the IPCC's first assessment report. These are their exact graphs, and you see the same thing. You see temperatures over the past 10,000 years. Here they are today, according to the United Nations. Here's where they were for the past 10,000 years, predominantly warmer than today. Here we see the past 1,000 years. We see the warming of today, but nevertheless still cooler than temperatures of the medieval warm period. So understand the context is very important. When folks tell you in the media, when you read the articles, when you see on news, the media reports, these are the hottest years on record, they use the term, quote, on record, because they say, well, we've only had a mercury thermometer network that's been global for the past 100 years, so we'll conveniently say that's the record. They're deliberately trying to mislead you and everybody else into believing that these are the warmest years ever. They're not. Temperatures are still contextually quite cool. Now, even for the little warming that we've had, we can see it's not alarming, we can see it's not unusual, we can see the temperatures are unusually cool, not unusually warm. But what is the cause of temperature variations? These data were taken from Geophysical Research Letters. It's a peer-reviewed science journal. It's one of the most prestigious science journals in the world. Solar scientists, sun experts who measure solar output, they reconstructed solar output going back, here we have charts going back to 1600. And what you notice, here in the 16 and 1700s, solar output was at a minimal. I mean, the sun does not produce the same amount of energy all the time. It varies. Around 1700, the early 1700s, you see an increase in solar output, pretty much a flat amount of output there, and then a step up again. So you have minimal solar output, step up in the early 1700s, step up again around 1900. Remember this temperature chart? Remember that pattern. Here we have, this is from the United Nations itself. Temperatures bottomed out 1700s, step up in the 1700s, flat, step up in 1900. The correlation between solar output and global temperatures is near exact. Even in the 20th century, the temperature record for the 20th century shows a warming around 1900 that lasted until about 1945, a cooling from 1945 until 1977, then a warming again. You see here in the solar output, you see the step up until the middle of the century and the flattening out. Only in the past 30 years or so can you make any kind of a case for carbon dioxide emissions having an impact on temperature. And again, as we saw from the previous charts, it's not that much. Now, oftentimes folks like me, folks like you in the room, we're called deniers. We're told the science is settled. Everything we need to know is on record, so why do you even dispute it? There's so much that we can present to contradict this, but here's the first one. I want you to remember this because it's so important. The United Nations First Assessment Report, 1990, predicted, said straight out, we can expect 0.3 degrees Celsius of warming every decade from now on. Folks like myself and others at the Heartland Institute and other climate realists, we looked at the temperature record and we said, well, we see about 0.1 degrees Celsius, not 0.3, and that's what we expect to continue. We were vilified as denialists for saying so. Well, that was 1990. It's been nearly 40 years, and we could take a look at the temperature history. Here on the right, you have the temperature record as shown by NASA and NOAA satellites. What you see is a warming at a pace of 0.13 degrees Celsius per decade. Almost exactly what skeptics said. And the alarmist United Nations predicted more than double that. So what's happened since? The United Nations now, instead of predicting 0.3 degrees Celsius of warming, now the UN predicts 0.2 degrees Celsius. In other words, they've already met us in the middle. They've already said we've been at least as wrong. And even that meeting us in the middle, they're still over-predicting warming. At worst, the United Nations agrees that, well, we were equally close to the truth. But the scientific data shows skeptics were closer. When you hear the science is settled, when you hear people called denialists, remember this and point out this data. They've already admitted that they were wrong. The scientific evidence, much more than a group of lemmings telling us everyone agrees and you're the sole outlier maverick, the scientific evidence is clear that skeptics have been and continue to be closer to the truth on the predictions of how much warming will occur. But it's not just how much warming will occur. Probably the most important issue, more so than the temperature increase of the past, more so than how much warming is occurring now, is what are the impacts? Because if a warmer climate is better for human health and welfare, well then why are we fighting? If it's neutral, again, why are we fighting? And the notion that somehow the climate during the Little Ice Age between approximately 13 and 1900 AD was ideal for humans is laughable. During the Little Ice Age is when we had more extreme weather events, more famines, more plagues, etc. For those of you who are history buffs like myself, you may have seen the History Channel special, The Little Ice Age. That was not an ideal climate, but the alarmists tell us that's the case. Let's take a look at what's happened as a result of temperatures warming. First of all, we have seen a measurable and substantial greening of the Earth. Satellites, NASA satellites, have been able to measure foliage throughout the planet since 1982. Scientists have evaluated the data and the imagery. This is from Geophysical Research Letters, again, a peer-reviewed publication that has analyzed the data. The finding was, quote, the anticipated carbon dioxide fertilization effect is occurring, and that the fertilization effect is now a significant land surface process. What you see in green and shades of green and blue, this is where you have an increase in foliage. This is where you have a greening of the Earth. Oftentimes we're told that global warming is causing droughts and desertification and expanding deserts. But look here, Southern Sahara Desert. This is all desert, nothing's changed, but here you see a substantial greening, an increase in advancement of plant life. Southwest Australia, the United States Southwest. But those are just a few areas. Throughout the globe, you see significant increases in foliage. Scientists have measured that. Similarly, NASA website, a study from 2016 finds the same thing. Quote, the greening represents an increase in leaves on plant and trees. Carbon dioxide fertilization explains 70% of the greening effect. Anything you see in green, that's an increase in foliage, a greening of the planet. Yellow and red is a decrease. This is a substantial improvement. This is something that if the opposite were happening, if plant life, if trees, if shrubbery were decreasing as the planet warms, we would be hearing about what an ecological disaster it is. When we see as the planet warms over the past 40 years now, when we see this substantial greening, and scientists say it is specifically attributable to carbon dioxide, why is the media hiding that? You hear about the social cost of carbon. How about the social benefits of carbon? That is substantial. Now, one would expect that if there is a greening of the Earth, if carbon dioxide and global warming are enhancing plant life, that you might see that in crop production, and that is indeed the case. Here we have crop production, corn, wheat, rice, vegetables, and fruits. Data going back to 1970. This is presented by GeoHive, which aggregates United Nations and USDA crop data. What you see is that a doubling to tripling of crop outputs has occurred in the past 40 years, the period of global warming that we're told is so horrible. This is a result of longer growing seasons. This is a result of fewer frost events. This is a result of carbon dioxide, which plants eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. We see it in the scientific evidence. To quantify this, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization reports that the 2017-2018 season produced record global cereal yields per acre, corn, wheat, and rice. One would expect that when you look at the chart, but seemingly every week there is a news article at the top of the Google News search for global warming that says global warming is destroying crop output. 2017-2018, record year globally for crop output. This happens virtually every single year. As the planet warms, crop output increases. The 5 countries with the largest populations, China, India, the United States, Indonesia, and Brazil. These are the ones where it's most important to have strong crop output. Let's take a look here. China set a national record for cereal yields, that's corn, rice, and wheat. That was in 2016, the last year for which we have data. The second highest yields were in 2015. Third highest were in 2013, fourth highest 2014. Again, it's not just a one-year anomaly. Each and every year we see crop records being set as the planet warms. By the way, crop output in China, 27% higher now than it was just in the year 2000. That's remarkable. More than double the yields right now than was the case in 1980. I mean, that's just incredible. That's an incredible benefit that we're seeing as the planet warms. India, we see the same thing. Records set in 2016, the last year for which we have records, record crop yields. Crop output currently is 30% higher than in the year 2000. That's a remarkable increase in less than 20 years. And more than double the yields per acre than was the case in 1980. Third highest population country, the United States. Yields today are 39% higher than was the case at the turn of the century. And again, more than double what they were in 1980. Indonesia, 34% higher than they were at the turn of the century. Nearly double what they were in 1980. Brazil, 92% higher. 92% higher than they were in the year 2000. That's nearly a doubling in crop yields per acre than was the case not even 20 years ago, and more than triple the yields in 1980. These improvements have a tremendous beneficial impact on human health and welfare. It's because and under a global warming world that people around the world are able to eat. The people are not malnourished like they used to be. When we hear the alarmists talk about everything that's wrong in the world and how bad global warming is, remember this. And crop output is probably the most important factor in determining human health and welfare, the ability to feed ourselves. Also, we're told that global warming kills and will be killing. Global warming is costing lives. We've heard the assertion that President Trump's climate agenda will kill people. I believe it was John Kerry who said it most prominently, many others. But it's interesting, the British medical journal, The Lancet, probably the most prestigious medical journal in the world, peer-reviewed, study published there in 2015. What they found is that 7% of deaths globally can be attributed to temperatures that are less than optimal. That's a lot. That's 4 million people dying each year because of temperatures that are not optimal. But the remarkable part of the study is it's not that global warming, it's not hot temperatures that are killing people. 20 times more people are killed by cold temperatures than warm temperatures. Remember that. Again, that's remarkable. This is in The Lancet. This is a peer-reviewed study. 20 times more people dying from cold temperatures and warm temperatures as the planet warms. Oh, and by the way, it's not an occasional rogue polar vortex, which is asserted to be caused by global warming. I'd love to talk about that during Q&A if you like, why it's not. But the reasoning, the cause is persistent, somewhat colder than average temperatures. That is the killer. As the planet warms, we will have far fewer of these persistent, moderately cold events. Global warming not only does not kill people, global warming saves lives. And if global warming continues in its current modest trajectory, global warming will save millions of lives each and every year. It's not just the Lancet study. According to official statistics from the U.S. Center for Disease Control, 800 more people in the United States die every day in the cold months of December, January, and March, or December, January, and February, than the average for the rest of the year. Again, when we're told that global warming will be killing people, it's just the opposite. Cold temperatures kill in the United States and around the world, and we can measure it in our data from the federal government. Next up, we hear about extreme weather events. We're told that global warming is making them worse. If we believe what we hear in the media, hurricanes didn't exist, nor the tornadoes before SUVs and coal power plants. But here we have data. This is from Ryan Maui. He's a meteorologist. He took official data from the federal government, from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. What you see on top, this is a trend going back to 1970 in the number of tropical storms globally. What you see on the bottom is the number of hurricanes. You do not see a significant increase. In fact, you don't see any increase at all. In fact, you don't even see a flat line. What you see is that the frequency of tropical storms and their stronger cousins, hurricanes, is decreasing as the planet warms, something the media doesn't tell you. Total tropical storm energy, we're often told, oh, well, maybe they're becoming less frequent, but global warming makes each one that does occur worse, so we're having more tropical storm energy. What you see here is essentially a flat line. Fewer storms, same amount of energy. To argue that global warming is creating a hurricane crisis simply defies statistics. By the way, one thing I'll note before we move on to tornadoes, it's interesting that we just recently set a record by far for the longest period in human history, or at least in recorded history. I won't delve into what the alarmists say. The longest period in recorded history going back to the mid-1800s for the United States without a major hurricane strike. That's Category 3 or higher. We went more than a decade without one. The previous record was several years less than that. When we finally had a Category 3 hurricane strike in 2017, then all of a sudden the media predictably blamed it on global warming. When we had a Category 3 hurricane strike this year, the media blamed it on global warming. But it's funny, when we went through the stretch, longest by far stretch in recorded history without a Category 3 or higher hurricane strike, we didn't hear about it. Again, as the Earth has warmed, major hurricane strikes have become less frequent. Tornadoes. This is from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. This is a tornado history going back to the mid-1950s. Keep in mind that during the mid-1950s, we didn't have the radar technology we have today, so there were likely many more tornadoes that were occurring that weren't recorded. But even so, you certainly do not see an increase in the number of tornadoes. What's really important, though, is when we look at F3 or stronger tornadoes. What we see here in the same data is a substantial decrease in the frequency of strong tornadoes. As global warming occurs, once again, we don't see an increase in extreme weather events, we see just the opposite. 2017-2018, we set a record for the longest period in recorded history without a single tornado death here in the United States. Didn't hear much about that. And in fact, all 4 of the longest periods on record without a tornado death have occurred since 2012. Drought. Whenever there's a wildfire, it's being blamed on droughts, or droughts in general that they say will cause crop failures. Of course, we're not seeing the crop failures, but let's look at drought data. According to International Journal of Climatology, from 1951 to 2010, peer-reviewed study, for most of the conterminous United States, drought frequency appears to have decreased during the 1901 to 2014 period. Throughout the 20th century, as the planet warmed, we had less drought in the United States. USA Today reported in 2017, drought set a record low with only 6.1% of the lower 48 experiencing drought conditions. Had never happened before. We're told global warming is making drought worse. Where is it? Theoretical and applied climatology, peer-reviewed study, finds that globally there is no significant trend in drought. Weather and climate extremes, another peer-reviewed study, this year found that, quote, there's no clear trend on the number and/or intensity droughts at global or continental level. Moreover, an analysis of the extreme hotspots of agriculture, drought does not intensify an increase on the number of events and/or in their intensity. The planet is a large place. Hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts, you name it. These events have always occurred. They didn't start with coal power plants and SUVs. The fact that you may have them still occurring, you cannot expect global warming to chase them all away. Neither can you blame any individual drought or hurricane or tornado on global warming. In fact, you can't blame any of them because when you look at the overall data, they are becoming less frequent and less severe as the planet warms. One other chart that's very telling regarding drought and precipitation. This is from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And I hope that you're keeping in mind and you're noticing that I'm citing official data and peer-reviewed studies for everything I say. It's not a Heartland study, it's not a Cato study. These are verifiable, objective data and summaries. Here we have, in green, you have the percentage of America that has been excessively wet at a given time. In yellow, you have the period of America that's been excessively dry. The higher the green goes, the more wet the country's been. The lower the yellow goes, the drier it's been. This goes back to 1895. Although at the bottom it says like January, that's from their website. Each period you see, that's a 10-year span, going from January of that year to January of the other year. Take a look at the bottom, at the drought frequency. This line here is the percentage, this is when we have 40% of America experiencing drought. Notice how it's been 4 decades since we've had that be the case at any time. That's remarkable because when you go back in American history, before this global warming that we're told is so bad, you see the percentage of the country experiencing 40% drought, the times that that's happened has been relatively frequent. As our planet has warmed, 40% drought has disappeared. When you hear global warming is causing more drought, keep that in mind. Now that it's been showed pretty clearly that global warming is not causing a climate catastrophe any way you cut it, we see the benefits in greening of the earth, crop production, we see the benefits in fewer extreme weather events. Even so, if we wanted to impose a Green New Deal, keep in mind, even if this were a climate crisis, what is being proposed would have little impact on global temperatures. The United States emits only 15% of global carbon dioxide. Our percentage falls each and every year. Our emissions fall each and every year, yet global emissions rise. According to the EPA's own tool for measuring temperatures, if we had 0 carbon dioxide emissions immediately, we implemented the Green New Deal, in the year 2100, we would have mitigated merely 0.2 degrees Celsius of warming. Almost too small to measure. This is from the Cato Carbon Tax Temperature Savings Calculator. They are using EPA's formula. If we implemented the New Deal, it would have no real-world temperature impact. And here, as I mentioned before, American emissions are going down while global emissions are going up. Top line, these are global emissions since the year 2000. They're up more than 50%. American emissions are down 14%. And yet we're told, we're castigated internationally, we're castigated by the environmental left in our own country, that it's the United States' fault. It's Donald Trump's fault. It's you denier conservatives' fault that we're having a global warming crisis. No, here in America, where we don't have the socialist, we don't have the international climate agreements from top-down sources, our emissions are going down. Those nations that signed the Kyoto Treaty, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Climate Agreement, their emissions are going up. And in response, we're told that we need to do what they're doing. They should be lining up at Donald Trump's doorstep saying, show us your secret. Because free market economies work. And the socialist economies, the top-down mandates, it's all talk and no action. If you believe in a climate crisis, there isn't one, but if you believe in one, then the United States and technological innovation and human ingenuity, not government programs, they are the answer. Okay, my concluding summary. Before I go there, I want to take a quick moment for a couple points I want to mention too. Oftentimes, you'll hear if you're discussing this with somebody, or you'll see on the panels on TV, well, 97% of the world's scientists disagree with you. I mean, you can make these points. I think you're just pulling some statistical voodoo on us, because why would 97% of the world's scientists disagree with you? When you hear that number or anything close to that, keep in mind, anybody who asserts that is either ignorant of the polls or they are deliberately misleading you. There are only a few surveys or polls that show anything approaching 97%, anything approaching a clear consensus. Those polls, those surveys ask two simple and meaningless questions. Question number one they ask, has the Earth warmed in the past century? What have I told you? It has. Right at the very beginning I showed you. Question number two they ask, have humans played a significant role? Well, I don't think that carbon dioxide emissions have been the dominant role this century, but it's been a significant role. If you double atmospheric carbon dioxide, as a matter of physics, you'll get 1 degree Celsius of warming. I mentioned that at the beginning. We've had about a 40% increase since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. So we've probably caused about 0.4, 0.5 degrees Celsius of warming. Is it significant? Sure. It's significant for a small amount of warming that's occurred. Those aren't the issues that divide skeptics and alarmists. I'm part of the 97%. I've answered yes to both questions. But what's interesting, there's been one scientific organization where the full membership has been surveyed on this topic, the American Meteorological Society. They have had polls in 2012, 2014, 2016, 2018. And they are the only body for which all the members have been surveyed. When AMS scientists have been asked the question, are humans the primary cause of warming? Depending on which year the questions have been asked, it's been between 59 and 67% saying yes. It's not 97%, it's nowhere close to 97%. But what's more interesting than that is they asked the question, the first time they conducted the poll, how concerned are you? The number was 30%. So the question about whether humans are causing warming, that's not important. Only half of scientists who acknowledge or who state that humans are causing global warming, only half are very concerned. That's the key issue. So when you hear that a fair debate would have 97 alarmists on one side and 3 skeptics on the other, no, a fair debate would have 7 skeptics and 3 alarmists, because only 30% of scientists in the surveys that have asked the question are very concerned. So let me conclude with this regarding the science. The warming of the past century still leaves the Earth cooler than in recent history. Still leaves us cooler than most of human history. That's very important. It's not a crisis. We've been there before. Second, the pace of warming is much less than the United Nations and climate alarmists have predicted, and it continues to be much less. Third, the impacts of our ongoing warming are primarily beneficial. Fourth, eliminating all carbon dioxide emissions under the Green New Deal or any other program would have almost no impact on global temperatures. So when we hear about the Green New Deal, when we hear about the economics, when we hear about the political ramifications, which are substantial, keep in mind it's all to accomplish nothing. Nothing on the climate front, nothing on the science front. Thank you very much.